Hello everybody, we're back for our second session after lunch. I think everybody should have more energy since we got a good meal in us. At least I know I'm feeling better. Wait for a few more people to start coming in. We're ready to start the next session, so please come in. Otherwise, I'm going to send my daughter out there. You don't want to mess with her. Her dad trained her right, so. Our next speaker is going to be Zapedia. He's a gold speaker, gold sponsor, Nordan representative. Nordan is a sustainable and will be leading with the development, marketing, production, and delivery of environmentally friendly and safe windows and doors with accessories. Hopefully you start bringing this stuff to America because we have bad windows and doors.
Good afternoon. One thing I can tell you for sure is that my name is not environmental friendly. Over the years, hundreds of people tried to pronounce it. They burn hundreds of thousands of calories. No one succeeded. So, my name is Zbigniew Kasprzyk. I'm sales director of Northern Poland. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for having me here. Wood Association for creating me that opportunity. And so, we are at Northern wood enthusiasts. And we didn't actually know what to expect here. Is this going to be another conference with Congress Hall with black tie, dinner type of thing? And actually we are meeting all of you as a wood enthusiast, same as us. That's very encouraging. Obviously, key figures about Nordan, but Nordan comes from Norway, Denmark, and it is a real love story. This company has been established in 1926. Before that, some Danish guy applied for visa trying to go to America. At that time, he had to wait like between 18 and 24 months to get the visa. In the meantime, he went to Norway, found his love, and he settled in a town called Moi, which is like 90 minutes drive from Stavanger. He started with building houses and making railway sleepers. And it took nearly 100 years to get to the point where we are manufacturing 700,000 products per annum. And we are sustainable. We have 12 factories across Europe, and I will touch that on my next slides. But this sustainability is our North Star. Having a Norwegian background, they are very careful about nature. They treat nature with a certain respect. I'm glad to be here. By the way, we do notches as well, because we manufacture wooden windows. We are not as perfect as you. We use some metal staples, but anyway, notch is a notch. On the previous slide, you've seen that we mostly using green energy. We have solar farms right next to the majority of our factories. We use green energy in most part of them. But in 2022, we set a bold goal that we will reduce our CO2 footprint by 50% by 2030. And obviously, the low-hanging fruits are not there anymore. We used every single opportunity to improve our process, and now we are chasing micro gains. We contribute also to the green transition because we are aware that the climate, which has been well described by earlier speaker, is in danger, is at risk. Our organization is fully involved in that. We do lots of initiatives. Not later than 4 weeks ago, we have planted a half a hectare of trees in one of the forests right next to the factory. But as well as internally, we're looking for external opportunities. This is related with our suppliers. We're trying to shorten the supply chains, trying to find local suppliers of everything we can find, just to make us even more environmental friendly. EPD generator. It's quite complicated, but it stands for Environmental Product Declaration. We do manufacture windows, and the times where you could manufacture one size of a window is not there anymore for decades. The challenge we have is that every single window is different shape, different size, different glass. By the way, window is not that old as log houses. There are some evidences about windows in ancient Asia. It is not that old as log buildings. Natural window or elevation window became to be popular in 14th century BC, which is quite early comparing to your presentation, sir. Why we do it? We have legislation coming. Some of these documents are already in place. We have customer demands. People are more conscious, more aware about negative impact of non-environmental product. Some of the investors or clients, they are up for green buildings. So at very early stage, before building permission, they would like to assess the future condition of a building. We came up with the idea that although we have all windows different sizes, there must be a solution for it. And obviously, we released first environmental product declaration back in 2014, which is nearly a decade ago. But imagine that to collect all necessary information to be able to create the document, it took us 10 months. At that time, we were completely not prepared to be able to provide necessary information. Now, 10 years later, we're launching something which is totally ahead of our competitors or people who are manufacturing windows. Just quickly about what is this. We have three different, I would say, qualities of environmental protection, product declaration. First is industry. Industry is more or less for people who are manufacturing goods which are available out from the shelf. In our window business, industry means wood window, plastic window, aluminum window. There is nothing about sizes, there is nothing about different configurations, etc. Next step, this one which we have released in 2014, is product specific. It's much more detailed because it can say that this is window and here is door, but still we have different variation between this type of window with safety glass, or fully glazed door, or half glazed door. This is GWP, stands for Global Warming Potential. Window is nothing else than wood, that glass covered with either plastic, wood, or metal. And if you, as you see on the slide, there is a difference between different kinds of glass. As I mentioned earlier, we do manufacture around 700,000 windows a year, and we use more or less 2,500 different glass combinations. So the EPD, which is, we call it static, is covering only a very narrow part of our production. Here is just a screenshot from our pricing or ordering system. It shows two similar units, which is balcony door. The difference between them is glass we use. And we are ending up with a massive difference between global warming potential total. 121 kilograms versus 168 kilograms. Going forward, after 2028 or 2013 for residential building, this has to be in place with all of the manufacturers, because the precision is needed. Okay, if you have a house with few windows, it doesn't make that much of a difference, but imagine like 20 stories block of apartments. The difference is going to be vast. This is just a summary of what we have discovered during our journey. Product specific, this one which we released in 2014, showing you only details which are related to pure manufacturing process. From the earlier presentations, we know that now everybody is focused on life cycle assessment. It is situation from cradle to grave. From the moment when goods are coming to the factory as raw materials until it is recycled and hopefully reused. Our dynamic climate declaration allows investors, architects and specifiers to precisely assess the full negative impact of product, which is in our case window, in their case the house, the building, throughout the entire lifespan. Now I have to use my scribbles because, I don't know, is it because of heat outside or last night, this is not crystal clear to me anymore. Basically, life cycle assessment starts with A1, which is materials coming to our window factory. We have to include the transport from the supplier of components to our factory. And A3 stands for pure manufacturing process. Then our machine is able, due to link between ordering or pricing system, it has information about delivery to site address, so we can assess the global warming potential of transport from factory to construction site. Next thing is obviously installation. Another one is maintenance. And in our generator, for example, we include for one replacement of a glass throughout the whole maintenance period. Our windows are, well, we calculate, and this is proven by the facts, that wood-only window can last at least 30 years. Wooden window with aluminum cladding can last 60 years. And we have proven examples of wooden windows being fitted in 1972 in Norway. Last summer, some of them been ripped out. Still very good. No rot, no fungus. Everything was ideally crafted back in 70s. Norden has nearly history of 100 years, so we do have scientific data which can prove that our product lasts 30 or 60 years. Then, in conjunction with a body which is called EPD Norway, they created for us the computer algorithms which we fit using our input data, and then we, or our customers, getting final results. Obviously, it is not only global warming potential, it is also information about the impact on the ozone layer. It is a few other important information. We can provide our customers with 37 indicators. What is presented here? Obviously, we have a simplified version, which is quite handy for small residential buildings, as well as this extended up to 37 different details, which are there just to fulfill the needs of architects, facade consultants, specifiers, when it comes to the housing estates or block of apartments. To be able to measure the entire lifespan of a product, recently we have introduced global trade item number. Some of you might be familiar with it. It is basically unique product number. Remember that we have 700,000 windows with 2,500 glass combination, 257 colors, etc. So this is a unique number, which is labeled on a side of the sash or frame. It is not on the wall side finish like installer. It is on the pallet visible. It is from inside. Thanks to this number, maintenance officer, customer can simplify, let's say, the maintenance by providing proper details about the size of the glass, etc. But as well as he can generate his own climate declaration. For us, it is gonna be beneficial in next 10-15 years when we be able to gather enough information to reassess the lifespan of a product as well as the real cost of the maintenance. Because at this moment of time, we just anticipate some spendings, like one glass replacement, one handle replacement, etc.
How do I turn it on?
This is helping our customers, this is helping us
You turn it on here.
to find those micro gains when it comes to being even more environmental friendly. I would like to leave you with one sentence. The best window is the one you never have to think about. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, but in Europe we have a slight challenge with it because the building regulations, they don't treat fiberglass as a glass. It is infill panel rather than the glass.
Okay, our next speaker is Jackson. Hopefully he's around. Can't miss him. Jackson is a member of the Timber Framer Guild. He's also a very nice guy because I let him dance with my daughter last night, so he's very trustworthy. And he also stands at 6'9". So you can't straight up. But he's going to be talking about his project in the Spire, Notre Dame.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Here we go.
All right. The big one is to proceed forward. Yeah, okay. This trip to Estonia marks, I do believe, just about a decade since the first time I ever came to this country. And it's a real honor to be back, and I've had a lot of opportunities in between now and then to come back and join in various projects and work, and it's always surrounds friendship and some sort of great project. And I love this country, and I look forward to continuing to come back for years. And every time I get to come back, introducing new friends to this country and to our friends that are here is an incredible honor. Last year, for 3 months, I got to spend taking part in the reconstruction of the Spire of Notre Dame. I'm going to start my story a little bit with why me and how that came to be. I am not the best carpenter in America. I'm not the best timber framer in America by any means. I had the opportunity to meet Pat Moore here for the very first time. And the first question he asked was, how did you get there? Because Pat Moore knows the layout method, he knows the language, and there are many people that are infinitely capable of having taken part in this work. I'm going to start with the beginning of my journey to Notre Dame, and it started a little bit over 10 years ago when I first met Andre Seuss on a project put together by Hans House and the Timber Framers Guild. I was an apprentice in the Timber Framers Guild at that time, working my way and studying towards becoming a journeyman in the craft of timber framing. During World War II, the Nazis were moving across the southern Europe and burning these wooden synagogues as they went. There was a couple from the university in Warsaw that had studied these very, very closely, and they saw this happening, and they went and captured as much information as they could about one in particular, which was the DuBois synagogue in what is currently Ukraine. They captured as much detail as they could, and the university, or the Museum of Polish Jews in Warsaw wished to have a reproduction of this synagogue. They had a quote from a professional company to reconstruct it for them, and they were planning on moving forward with that until they met a couple named Rick and Laura Brown who run an organization called Hans House Studio. And Hans House focuses on doing traditional reconstructions using traditional tools to learn about who made those structures and how they were, and to learn about who made those structures and what those structures meant to the people that made them by engaging in that work themselves. Typically, there's a huge learning component involved in these. So at any given time on this job site, there were 20 timber framers and about 40 or more learners. When this process was happening, word kind of got out, and we had a lot of people from all around Europe came to get engaged with this work. When we arrived, there were 200 silver fir logs there, and they all were hewn into their respective shapes. At one point in time, one of the leads on the project came out and took away our measuring tools because we were taking too long and doing a job that would have not been typical of the period. So here we have some students here, young people that were engaged in studying maybe jewelry making or these types of things, came out and got to learn how to hew and spend enough time doing it to actually become quite proficient in it. It was a real pleasure to be able to take part in what this was a monumental impact on these young people's lives, and it's really great to be able to see them going forward in their lives after this experience. This is a reconstruction of the synagogue from the roof line, or from the headers of the doors and windows up. So it was an incredibly detailed project. We're working in an outdoor open-air museum in southwest Poland there. And here are the students studying and practicing. They were using all natural pigments, and again, it's a historic reconstruction, and there it is being installed in the Museum of Polish Jews in Warsaw. The beauty of this thing continues to impact people's lives, and it's been a real honor to be able to have taken part in this project. If you're ever in Warsaw, I highly recommend checking it out. With this comes the notion of how we rebuild matters. This could have been done with modern tools, with a tight crew of people that were only focused on executing this work, but engaging as many different people as possible. We were able to learn how this building was made and embody some of the makers of this building in ourselves and carry it forward, and be able to impact people and viewers and interested people who this matters to. This history was very well erased from this part of the world. And here it is being enjoyed by kids, which is definitely part of the plan. From there, next project with Andresus was on the island of Vilsandi, helping to take part in the repair and reconstruction of some of the beautiful windmills out there on the island, along with an international team. Yoshi is here with us. Miles Jeunesse, who will share his experience working on Notre Dame, was also there, along with a great crew of folks, and it was a fantastic experience. For me, always part of these experiences is learning from masters, and often when you're learning from masters in a foreign country, there's a language barrier, and at first that presents itself as very difficult. And now I've found it to be something that I rather enjoy very much. Learning directly through the work, often just pantomiming or coaxing out my limited Estonian, as well as working with a master who will eventually admit that he does indeed speak some English. This was an incredibly gratifying project to be part of. Again, taking part in preservation, restoration, heritage preservation. In my personal philosophy, part of heritage preservation is preservation of the passing on the knowledge of the maker, and obtaining the knowledge of the maker is acquired by doing the work. Another project with Andresus and Miles Jeunesse in Sedgwick, Maine, along with Carpenters Without Borders, Charpentiers Sans Frontières, who had a huge impact on the reconstruction of Notre Dame, and were involved in enterprises in France who Miles will tell you more about. Again, all hand-hewn, very labor-intensive, but learning by doing and keeping the craft alive by doing the work. April 15, 2019, I remember sitting in my office along with coworkers, and somebody said the roof of Notre Dame was on fire, and pretty much all productivity stopped for the day as we sat and were absorbing this new information. In this fire was revealed to the most of the world that did not know what was underneath that roof, the lead on that roof, and had never even wondered. It became open knowledge that there was some amazing timber work under there that was burning in front of our eyes. An image pre-fire, the roof of Notre Dame, the low portions there that you see are from roughly around 13th century, but definitely spanned centuries to complete that work. And the spire there that we're looking at was a reproduction done by Viollet-le-Duc that was completed in, I believe, 1859. And it's easy to think of that as being a very early piece of work, but when we think about it, that spire was constructed just about 30 years before the construction of the Eiffel Tower. So it was very much within the period of the industrial age. I don't know if you all recall, but from a design office, we had heard that there was going to be a design competition to reconstruct the roof of Notre Dame. And we started seeing ideas like this, like maybe there would be a garden, or they would cover the whole thing with stained glass, atriums and huge spires, glass spires, some very, very big fancy ideas. And then it started to get a little bit absurd. The truth of the matter was, on the back end, that the French Parliament and the French antiquities departments weren't going to allow this to happen. They had all manner of standards and requirements to abide by. And here we have an early image of the forêt, which means the forest, which is a term often used to describe the very dense timber work that is in the roof of cathedrals. And again, Charpentier sans frontières. As this talk was going on, and many people were openly doubting whether or not France had either the materials or the know-how, the heritage and craft to be able to do these reproductions, Carpenters Without Borders just got out ahead of it and began to do a reproduction, which, from my perspective, was very much kind of a mic drop and ended the conversation. And it was relatively predictable, and it was made open knowledge that the roof would be reconstructed as it was originally constructed, using the methods and materials that most closely matched the time of the construction, of the original construction. They were working with the drawings of what's called Truss Number 7, and they completed that work. Just prior to the fire, one person in France who was doing his final studies to be a high-level monument architect named Rémy Fremont had crawled all through the attic of Notre Dame and done very detailed drawings of all of the trusses in the roof there. This was just a short number of years before the fire. The organization Hans House reached out to Carpenters Without Borders and said, hey, we would like to do this as well as an act of solidarity. We believe that we have the tools that we can do this with, and we also have the know-how, and we would also like to be part of this big sharing. In the United States, Hans House and the Timber Framers Guild worked together with the Catholic University as well as the National Park Service. We brought in, again, in classic Hans House style, bringing in as many young people, students, learners, to get hands-on with this. And here we are on the National Mall, along with the preservation carpenters from the National Park Service doing a raising there right in front of our national buildings. This was a hand raising, so here you have, we're raising it all with ropes and pulleys and block and tackle, and it really helped raise awareness about timber framing and about craft in the United States, the state of craft, and was a real honor to be part of this gesture of solidarity towards the reconstruction of the roof of Notre Dame. Again, all hand-hewn, using tools of the time. This is on site in front of the National Basilica, which is a Catholic church, the largest Catholic church in the U.S. and kind of the center of that faith. There was one night on site we had a very bad thunderstorm, and the whole next day the power was out. But none of us knew that until somebody told us at the end of the day, because we were just using all non-powered tools. Leaving the trace of the axe, trying to figure out what the original tools would have been, trying to make our hewing as fine as possible. Different hewing axes leave different surfaces. And we had plenty of room to critique one another's hewing and try to master this process. Very labor-intensive process. We were making the pegs for the truss. And pinning the pieces together using the traditional French connections. There's Jerry using a period axe, which I believe ultimately, again, Miles can speak more to this, but there was some relatively tight controls about what axes could be used in an effort to match the markings that would have been early. Here's Miles doing some piquage, which is the French scribe method, which he'll be teaching next week here on IMIA. Again, engaging with young folks, many of whom have now moved on to also be builders. We had North Bennett Street School. That gentleman right there, Michael Burry, lived with me in France we lived together and worked on this project for 3 months. And through Hans House and our affiliation with our respective organizations, this is what brought us there. Here's his class from the preservation school that he's a teacher at having their graduation on the site there, which it was hard to tear them away from the work that they were doing because they were enjoying it so much. And there we have it. Through this, Rémi Fremont, the aforementioned architect, heard about the work that we were doing and came to check it out and came to see it. And he was very excited to do so. Now this trust has been to a lot of different places in the United States and is part of generally raising awareness and raising funds for the taking part in the reconstruction of Notre Dame. Model making, as in Patrick's talk, he talked a lot about model making, which is kind of fundamental to French carpentry and the learning of the methods and understanding how these buildings go together. And so these processes were reproduced in the United States as we continue to reproduce the model over there and work towards a greater understanding of how this roof went together, since all of this information came to light. This was from also just before the fire was a point cloud was created, where you set up a laser and use dots on the wall, and that laser spins, and that laser tells you where all of those points on the wall are, and then you move it, and you move it, and you move it, and it creates millions and millions of little points that tell you all of the shapes that you're seeing within that space. And so you can see here, this is highly irregular. Well, not highly irregular, but it's not perfectly square, it's far from it. This is just the way that the stones have moved over the years, and so it requires the trusses and the construction of the new construction kind of follow this pattern. It's not so simple as measuring a 3-4-5 to see what is a right angle. And here we have the nave is that forwardmost portion, the apse is the aft, and then where all of these pieces cross is called the transept, and the transept is where that spire sits. So we don't have a spire yet on our model. The spire will be the most complicated part to put together. Here we are again, finishing up our work on the American side. And here we have Philippe Villeneuve and Remy Dumont and Rick Brown meeting for the first time and coming to see the work that we've done here in the United States. And at this point in time, it was agreed that some American carpenters from this project would be able to go over and take part. Certainly, in my experience, working on the trusses or the heavy timber construction would be the things that I would have been most familiar with. And they had a lot of critique to say about our axe work, which was also, of course, most welcome. But he was overjoyed to see this. They stayed until like 11 o'clock at night. And, it was very exciting for him to see this on the United States side of things. And that brings me to the beginning of my adventure in Asselin, in Briey. This is the construction of the very bottom of the truss, and so this is going to have the 4 corners that sit on top of the stone walls. And this was the work that I thought I would be going there to do, but because of the intensiveness of this project and the focus that was applied to it by the French. We weren't able to bring over students or learners. We were only able to go as representatives of our craft at a professional level. And this work of creating these elements was executed by 4 companies all working together. And there wasn't really any room to mess around in there. So I did not ultimately get to take part in that work. But here we are on our send-off, headed off to France to take part in the reconstruction of the ornamentation of the spire. This is from the Asselin slides here, and they were very happy to have us there at the management level. But in the workshop, it wasn't immediately such. The fellows didn't know why we were there. Were we there because we thought we were better than them? Were we there because we paid money to be there? And I was also concerned that we'd be kind of turned into maybe wallflowers or not really allowed to participate. But that wasn't the case at all. These elements here that Michael's standing in front of are the pedestals that the saints stand on in the valleys of the Trousse there. So here we have a good shot of the spire and representation of the companies that were all responsible for the reconstruction of it. On the left here in the image we see the original spire of Notre Dame, which had bells in it, and ultimately began to damage the roof. Notre Dame lived for a long time without any spire at all, and it was after the French Revolution and the publishing of the Hunchback of Notre Dame that it was determined that Notre Dame was a French point of pride and that it should be renovated. After the French Revolution, it had ultimately turned into a storehouse and was not being very well kept at all. At this time, Viollet-le-Duc was working with another architect to do the redesign, which was quite modest initially, but the senior architect passed away, and almost immediately Viollet-le-Duc engaged in a redesign, which pulled out all the stops, added a whole other story to it, made everything extra Gothic. Viollet-le-Duc's ideal for the Gothic period was 13th century. Here we can see the spire itself coming down. The fire, of course, was the primary damaging element that destroyed all of this, but second to that would have been the amount of water that was dumped on the roof to stop the fire, and then the spire itself being clad in lead and crashing down through the roof left an incredibly large hole in the roof. We can see here the stone gable still standing, but what we have here is just an absolute irreparable mess. And that would have been, this right here is the crossing of the transept where the spire would have stood. Height of the spire, 58 meters, 190 feet. Height from the ground, 315 feet. It was a real pleasure to be able to work with these amazing drawings that they had done, that they had put together based on their original drawings of Viollet-le-Duc. Huge amounts of oak from all over France were gathered to execute this project. And a whole army of people, craftspeople. The number's around 2,000, and I wouldn't doubt if the numbers are similar when it comes to drafters, designers, and project leads and things like this. The timeline is quite astonishing, in my opinion. I've heard people grumble that it's taking forever, but you could compare this to a commercial project, and I think that this is really amazing how fast that they've been able to pull this off. The elements of the flesh. So here we see on the far left the apostles, the biblical characters, standing on their little pedestals in the valleys of the roof, and those were also removed for repair right just prior to the fire. Part of the reason for the fire was, and they had scaffolding up because they were assessing and executing repairs on this. So, although the damage was great, some of the details of the elements that were removed and elements that were measured right before the fire are pretty significant and contribute a lot to the material that we have that we're able to execute the repairs with. In the middle there you see the drawing of Viollet-le-Duc, and on the right the drawing from the modern design offices of the French. Begins with the tabouret, the base, and works its way up. So all of these elements are not medieval elements. These elements are all around in the 1850s these were done. So you will see bolts in this. All of these were bandsawn, so this is not hewn material, but this all represents the very big transition in the roof between the medieval structure and the mid-1800s. You can see there on the right the massive workshop that all of these things are being test fitted in. And then all the way up to the needle, which the weather vane the rooster stands on top of. So, the ornamentation of the steps. We were told not to bring any of our own tools or any of our own work clothes because those were all going to be provided to us. As some of you may have noticed, I am quite tall, so the work clothes didn't work out. I did not bring my own tools, but my cohort, Michael Burry, did bring his own tools, and I was muttering, cussing under my breath while I was helping him drag them through the Paris subway. At the end of the day, the tools that he brought were incredibly useful and allowed us to execute a lot of these very, very ornamental details here. So you see here we have on the left, you can see in that image the pieces that are in gray. Those were the elements that we were executing. Those high, tight peaked gables, the balustrades, the quadrifoils, and again another balustrade. And so these elements all travel around the roof or around the spire in an octagon. So they're all nothing's at a right angle to anything else. This is sharing with you some of the elements, the early drawings that were used and imagery that was used to determine how all of these pieces should be shaped and how they went together. This is showing you the early scaffolding, which Pat also did share. The modern metal scaffoldings certainly felt a lot safer than I would imagine this felt. But what a Herculean effort that would have been just to install that scaffolding. Again, on the left here, some of the drawings illustrating the early drawings that were used to guide us in the reconstruction. For all of these works that were granted to these various companies, they had to do prototypes first, so they had to basically build a thing before they were actually building the thing. So they would have to share this with the French architects for review. They would tell them to go back to the drawing board on various elements or what have you, and it wasn't until they executed a perfect prototype that they were granted the contract to do the work. While we were there, actually, they received they were granted another contract for further work that had been under review. So we got to do more work, but of course the timeline wasn't extended for us at all. So some of the drawings from the shop was really neat to be able to work with these. On the right there, you can kind of see all the small pieces that are illustrated, and these were the elements that we were reconstructing. So we were using power tools. We used a large shaper machine. The material would come in the back still with live edge bark on it. They had some material left over from another project that had been slabbed and stickered and bound together and had been sitting in their yard for about 8 years. So while the rest of the construction is all green or undried wood, this part in particular, because of all of these tiny little ornamental details, was decided to be done with some degree of dry wood. So it wasn't perfectly dry, but it was a lot drier than the rest of the material, and therefore much more stable. So the finishing details always being executed with hand tools. You can see there on the right, this is some script from Compagnon, a French carpenter, and it was so cool to be able to see just these kinds of little details around the shop where somebody was just taking so much pride in just even their handwriting. It was an honor to be there and be part of it. Michael inspecting one of the pedestals that the saints stand on, and just some beautiful raking light across the finishing of those interior voids there on that piece. Here was the shop. Half of the shop at any given time was still dedicated to just monument restoration. It was kind of interesting. You would think that they would have dropped everything and only focused on Notre Dame, but there was other work always going on the other side of the shop, and that was really cool to be able to see. You can see the plywood floor there, where they were using that to snap out the shapes of whatever they were working on in typical kind of picage approach, the French approach to laying things out. On the right there, that random piece of plywood is going to tell you something about what I have coming up to share with you. That's actually a barricade to keep pieces of metal and wood from flying off of a machine that I ended up using a great deal. But around our coffee break, we got to go stand around works of renovation such as this, random 500-year-old oak carvings, and watch this little squirrel's hands get cut off and then slowly replaced. And it was really cool to be able to see. For a lot of these guys, for all of these guys in the shop actually, their work on Notre Dame was the closest thing that they had ever done to new construction. The shop was really totally dedicated to monument restoration. So they're taking, the other side of the shop was always having a rafter would come in with the bottom rotted off, and they'd work on, extending, splicing pieces in and putting it back to work. Which I thought was an interesting point to me anyways. On the left there you can see the balustrade. All of the work that we did, once it was finished, it got boxed up. We were working in the Loire Valley, which is south and west from Paris, about 2 hours in their workshop there. But the workshop where the heavy timber construction for the truss itself was being done was on the far east side of France. So after we completed these works, they got put in a truck and traveled all the way out to the east side of France, where they were fit into those large octagonal-shaped heavy timber elements. You can see here in the bottom the standard tooling, and since these guys are mostly doing monument restoration, they didn't really use super fine tools because in their experience, these tools are going to be hitting rusty old fasteners and things like that as they try to do repairs on rafters and things. Between the tannins and the oak and the steel of the wood and the sweat in your hand, it would all come together to make a really black mess in your hands. And if you were sweating and wiping your face, you'd find that at the end of the day, you were just covered in black. I mentioned earlier that it wasn't necessarily immediately a warm welcome in the shop. There was nothing, nobody was rude, but the French tradition is that you shake hands and look everybody in the eye and say a good morning to everybody when you come in the shop. And you can kind of really tell when somebody isn't super excited about you when you're shaking their hand, if it's a good handshake or not. After days of working so close with one another, I'm proud to say that at the end of this process, all the handshakes were very good. And we made some really great friends in this process. Just finishing all of those little interior details. Again, putting these pieces together to ship them out to Brie to be fit into the Spire structure itself. Here you can see some of the detail of the kind of carving that was needed, as well as the pegs holding those pieces together. Where it was necessary and structurally required, mechanical fasteners like screws were employed, as well as some wood glue. You can see how pointy that little tip there is. When cutting on that stuff, if the grain ran straight through it, that would be a piece that would be very easy for it to fall off or break off. And if that were to happen, we didn't necessarily do the whole thing. But generally speaking, the bulk of this is held together with pegs and wooden joinery. We don't know if it we do know that it does not identically match the original joinery, just because we don't know exactly what the original joinery was. The drawings that we have are more conceptual from the architect, and it would have been left up to the master in the carpentry shop to determine how to actually put these pieces together. None of them had been taken apart prior to the fire, so there is definitely some speculation in how that was put together. Here you can see one of the instances where we have some bolts in there. This is how it left the shop. It was very interesting to see once we were on site, to be able to see the other metal fasteners that had been included in the Spire. Since it's such a tall thing, it has and is constantly under wind load and things like this. They did include some moment frames. Here you can see some of the kind of remarking of the French layout. The primary difference being that the markings that we have on here are in Sharpie rather than in chisel. But everything was color-coded just because we had front faces and back faces to all of this stuff. And it was really difficult to keep track of, but they did a really good job of it. There on the right is what I call a butterfly spline, and those were what was used to hold the fronts and backs of these details together. If you look close in there, you can see a lot of the pegs sticking out. So in between these pieces, there would have been a dado, and here you can see it on the right. You can see that groove in the wood there, and that's flared inside of there. So when you put the top one on, then you take one of those splines and you wax it up real good and hammer it in there, and that, as well as some dowels, held everything together. Here you can see how many straps and all this kind of stuff we used to pull these together as tightly as we could before we started adding those pegs. It's quite the process. It was really cool to be surrounded with all of these just really exotic pieces of wood carving. Here's one of Michael's tools. Michael had some French hewing axes that he wanted to bring along, and while they were figuring out the process of how to do this with machines, Michael got out his French axe and started going for it. By the time this piece of wood has come to this state, it has a lot of hours in it already. So he had quite the circle of French carpenters standing around him, sure he was going to screw this up and cost everybody a whole bunch of time and money. But Michael's very good at what he does, and it was a fantastic opportunity for him to be able to show that this work could have been done medievally, even though it wasn't. We don't know exactly what tools they were using at the time, but they had a lot at their disposal. Here's Michael operating a Bizet U, which is a chisel mortise, a double-ended chisel mortise that is used to clean the sides as well as the corners. Again, a medieval tool used to execute the work while you're standing. It's got a whole lot of weight to it, which helps your body not get worn out when you're doing this kind of hard work. But there you can also see the contrast there. We've got Mafel chain mortiser and Makita, 16-inch circular saw. So we were using all manner of tools. This is a shaper. This is typically a tool used in the cabinetry shops. And so the fellows that were taking part in this weren't familiar with this tool. I was also not familiar with this tool, and this was the first one that I had ever used. The amount of cutter head that you have sticking out of the blades there is not recommended, but was necessary to do this work. The custom fabricator of these knives didn't wish to fabricate them, and there behind that ruler you can see a piece of plywood used to protect the rest of the shop if one of those knives were to break. It's a super amazing tool. And that tool is what put all of these surfaces on these pieces here. You can see some of the burn marks in that. That's just because of how slow you had to go, because you can see all of that rising grain there. So for those of you that are kind of have your heads really in woodworking, going against the grain like that would have been the spot where that tool would have wanted to shoot all of that material off the table. And again, on the left there, you can see more of the French marking system. And when that was finished, we were all incredibly proud of the work that we'd done, and formed a really, really great team, even very much across language barriers. My French is very close to non-existent, and half of the guys in this picture didn't really have any English to share with us either. But again, carpentry, timber framing, woodworking is its own language, and there are many dialects of it. Whether or not it's log building in Estonia, log building in the United States versus timber framing. It's all approaches to wood joinery. And there are many different approaches, and it's always a pleasure to learn new them. I don't know if there was a general that was in charge of managing the timeline for the Reconstruction. His name was Georges Long. He passed away hiking the Pyrenees just before the completion of the project. We weren't sure in the shop whether or not we were supposed to hide from the general, or whether or not he would want to meet us or not. It turned out he was very excited to meet us and really enjoyed telling the story that the whole world had come to France to learn from the best carpenters in the world. And he very loudly referred to Michael Burry as Boston, and he called me New York. He was a really nice guy. Some of the work of the working alongside the compagnon was very, very interesting to be turned loose on these pieces with tools without folks really having an understanding of what your own capabilities were, I also didn't know what my own capabilities were. Going in thinking I was going to be working on the heavy timber construction, and then being faced with this, I was pretty sure that at the end of the day, my story would be titled something like "Messing Up on Notre Dame," or even something more powerfully worded. Here we can see the workshop where these heavy timber pieces are coming together, and our work is being incorporated into them. You can see how those pieces on the outside are canted, again, because it's going into an octagon. This would have been really cool, but again, I totally respect the decision to keep this only to the professionals. There were certainly guys that had worked their whole lives for this moment to be able to take part of this, and they weren't going to hand it off to some American dude. But again, in this shop, all of the lines for all of this were snapped out on the floor. One time, sharing this information with somebody, I was asked whether or not we accidentally, if we screwed anything up, if we cut anything too short. And I had the opportunity to explain that these, we didn't lay this out with tape measures. It's laid out from the exact one-to-one expression of it on the floor. So when you're using a tape measure, maybe you might burn a foot, or be working somewhere inside of that tape measure. But the power of this process is that just once you're done, and it all fits together, not too dissimilarly from log construction. We got a couple of full site tours, so we were able to personally go and take a tour of this workshop and see them fitting our elements into their elements. These are elements of the needle, which is the centermost piece of the spire. Again, that the rooster sits on the top of the spire. It's not a single piece. There are a couple of joints in here, but it was so amazingly huge. It was really cool to be able to see it. Makes me dizzy looking at it. And here, when we get to the top of the needle, you'll see a piece of plywood that was applied with the directions for positioning this piece. Since it's an octagon and all the pieces are octagonal, they had, again, a very complex system for identifying what the reference face was when they were working on any particular thing. What's up, what's down, because it would be very easy to try to begin putting pieces together that didn't belong together. Being able to see the carpenter's marks and the race knife work, the identifying marks that were applied to these pieces that would have been reproductions, and the carpenters that were doing this work would have been able to read the layout of the carpenters that did the work originally. And this French traditions that have kept these approaches alive for hundreds of years is something to be admired. And from there, all of the material was bundled up and shipped off to Paris. We got a tour of the job site in Paris. Here they have a floor that is built all the way up at the very roof. So this is the very top of the interior of the cathedral. The density of the scaffolding was astounding. They had to build this impenetrable forest of scaffolding underneath the crossing of the transept in order to support the various pieces that were needed to be installed in order to execute this work. Walking through that space and opening up a large construction curtain and finding yourself face to face with this rose window was a jaw-dropping moment that inspired awe, exactly as that window was supposed to. Those were installed. It was awe-inspiring. There you go. That's the word for it. But seeing the workers in there doing all of those little bits of gold leafing and repainting, and my conception anyways of kind of medieval period churches and stuff is that they're always really dark, and it's these kind of dark spaces. And since it would have taken a long time to build these vaults, when Notre Dame reopens, I think it's going to be brighter in there than it's ever been, even when it was originally constructed, just because of all the cleaning and the retouching that they've done. You'll walk into this space and it'll be, everything was covered in soot from candles and incense and years of the roof being open and the slow construction process. It's going to be really cool in there. Being able to put our hands on these pieces that were part of the emergency shoring process that I don't know if you've seen on the news, but I've certainly was following from the beginning, and it was cool to be able to see these pieces. And these pieces were able to be constructed off-site thanks to that point cloud that was created. So that digital mapping that had already been done, they didn't even need to go in and measure this stuff. They already had all the measurements for it. Again, scaffolding everywhere. You can see there we're standing high up above the flying buttresses. Visiting the bell towers, the top of one was damaged severely, but it's since been put back together. But it's really fantastic that these elements were able to be saved from the fire. Being on top of Notre Dame and pointing to my comrade there over at the Eiffel Tower, and this was his first trip to Paris, other than making our way through the subway, and dawning on him that his first view of the Eiffel Tower ever was from the roof of Notre Dame was pretty cool. Looking down from the bell towers at that scaffolding going up, I believe it was two of the largest cranes in Europe were busy on this job site and are still there. Some of the work that we've done being installed. I was able to go back in February and get another tour of the site, and it was deeply satisfied to be able to see this simple shave horse up in the attic of Notre Dame being utilized to help put the finishing touches on these structural pieces. And just that such a simple tool would still to this day have such a useful application, so much so that somebody would have hauled it up the scaffolding or brought it up in a job box. This was not work that I did, I just want to be clear about that, but it was in this moment in returning, I was definitely reminded of all of the skilled craftspeople that I was honored to represent in this process, and that for me anyhow, I won't speak for everyone, but the real holy place and the real church here, from my perspective, is here. It's above the vault. The density of the wood and the skyline of Paris surrounding was amazing moment. Being able to see art pieces installed on site, again, my French being limited as it is, and this being a highly active work zone, requiring harnesses and all these things, I was not invited to take part in this work, and I totally understand that. There you can see some more of the metal plates that were installed on the pieces that we had to provide rigidity to the whole tower. On the left there you can see just a little bit of some steel tubing, and that's part of the fire suppression system that they've added. So this is a mist-based system, so it's not going to make everything soaking wet. It's going to just remove the oxygen from the space with high-pressure water. In the roof there are also being installed some fire blocks, some firewalls, and it's a process that's going to be ongoing throughout the roofs, and the roofs of cathedrals and churches throughout France are now going to be slowly receiving fire breaks in them, so that if in this event the fire will be able to slow down. This is an expression of the rooster. The original rooster of Notre Dame was launched from the top and recovered. They have some relics of Paris in here, and I'm honored to say, along with other craftspeople, you can see in the breast of the rooster there, and how this kind of is representative of a phoenix. They included a scroll in this with the names of 2,000 craftspeople that took part in this reconstruction, and there are a lot of them in this room right now, Miles and Andres and myself, and that's an incredible honor. Being able to visit the Compagnon museums and just seeing where all of this amazing skills came from and began again, echoing some of the information that Pat shared in his presentation. And just being able to be just a small part of this amazing tradition of craft and heritage, and representing my community was a fantastic opportunity. Thank you so much for listening. Miles is going to follow me up here. You're going to introduce him?
Yes.
Cool. Nice job.
I think my photo's on here. Maybe not. You're just going to have to listen to me.
Yeah.
Hey. Jackson. Are my photos on here? They're on here flash drive. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, were they on the drive alone, or were they?
They're in a separate file.
Can we have?
Okay, so to start off, my name is Miles.
It is.
I'm a restoration timber framer. What's we're good?
You can go off.
Based in Huntington, Vermont. Vermont's a small state in the northeast of the United States, and Vermont actually has a land mass and population just about the same size as Estonia. It's really nice to be back here. I've been here just once before, working on a windmill project with Andres and Jackson and a few other, quite a few other very talented carpenters. I'm going to do my best to not go over anything that Jackson has already talked about, but also follow up on the things that he mentioned I might talk about. So to start off, just to give you a little bit more of an idea of who I am, I'm a restoration timber framer, and we mostly work on timber frame structures, although occasionally we do get to work on log buildings. There are very few log buildings, historic log buildings in Vermont, where I come from. So without that aspect to connect us, I guess I'd say the thing that I think connects the work that I do and this work in Notre Dame is probably our shared desire to keep this craft alive and also work with this base material, wood, and to further the ability to work in this way. And so what I'd say, here we go. What I'd say, while there's many reasons that this was a really monumental project for me to be able to work on, one of the biggest things, thank you, Jackson, one of the biggest things for me about this project, as Jackson had mentioned, as I'm sure you all saw, as soon as the cathedral burned, there's 100 news articles and this big outcry of how the craft is not there anymore to restore it. The trees don't exist, and there just isn't the ability to recreate this in the way it was. So let's make this out of concrete. Let's just make this out of sawwood that's all bolted together. Let's maybe have a design competition to build this out of something else. And on my part, I'm silently screaming like, no, this craft is still alive. While it's not, there's not craftspeople all over the world who are doing this work every day, or not a huge amount of them. This craft really is still there. And so to be a part of that, what felt like almost this coup, like this ability to say to the world, handwork is still alive and well, that is one of the things that I'm most proud of with this project. So to start, these are just a few neat details. On the right, you can see, just as Jackson was saying, this is a model in the Compagnon house, or one of the Compagnon houses. sort of this amazing masterpiece that was built in the early 1900s. And in the middle of that set of pictures, so I was staying in Normandy working with this company called Atelier DuBois, and the man who started this company, I was working for him and his son, who now runs the company. And the staircase in the middle picture is the railing is 3 stories tall and is carved out of one log, and it's just this absolutely stunning thing. And then the last picture is just this half-timbered building, which is something that's really common in Normandy, all built out of French white oak, which I don't know about the oak here, but the oak there is quite a bit, has a lot more tannins, so fairly more rot resistant than the white oak that we have in America. So to speak a little bit more about how I came to work at the Notre Dame project, as Jackson was saying, the CSF, Carpenters Without Borders project, that was in North America. That was their first North American project, and I think their first new frame build. I was part of that, and I met quite a few talented craftspeople who I know to this day. One of them, Andres, and another one, a young French carpenter named Loic, who at the end of the project, he was at loose ends for a couple weeks, and I said, Loic, why don't you come and stay with me, work in my shop, and just live with us for a little bit. And so he did, and we kept in touch, and it was maybe 3 or 4 years later that he called me up and he said, I have this project that we just got working on Notre Dame. Would you be interested in coming? And I said, yes. Let me ask my wife, but yes. And so it's just a sort of a chance that I was able to go and be part of this. Loic, his company, Atelier DuBois, it's a fairly small company. Usually there are about 9 people, but they focus on this sort of historic restoration, working much by hand, hewing often, whether it's from the round or this process that they call mixed, which is what we did for Notre Dame, where they saw 2 faces about 5 millimeters oversized, and then hew from the round the other 2 faces, and then go back and hew the final, the sawn faces. It allows all the sides to be hewn, but smooths up the hewing quite a bit. And so for a small company like this, to get this job is pretty monumental. Loic and his girlfriend Lou worked for a year and a half, I think, writing what amounts to a small book about their abilities and why they should be chosen to do this work. And to be able to get this job, which is the restoration of the roof framing, not including the transept. So the transept was built later, those are the crossing arms. So their contract was for the entirety of the long section, so the nave and the choir. So they teamed up with a company called Atelier Perrault. Perrault is a really big company, started in 1764, I think. They have a lot of experience working on historic monuments, but didn't have as much experience doing handwork. So they joined forces, and Desmont's expertise in handwork, he went and taught the folks at Perrault how to do this hewing and some more of the handwork, and Perrault brought its experience and the size of its company to be able to give the government, a good feeling about their ability to finish the project. So at Desmont's, we were working on the nave section, which is the section of the cathedral between the bell towers and the spire, and then Perrault was working on the choir and the apse, which is the section from the spire onwards. And the apse is that section with that beautiful crab that Jackson was showing. It's where the roof turns in on itself and becomes a half cone. This organization, Charpentiers Sans Frontières, they, as Jackson mentioned, had a pretty monumental part in the cathedral being restored in the way that it was, much like it was built, using really, if you go and look at it now, if you're able to look at the frame, you wouldn't see any difference in what the frame looks like from what it looked like before. I mean, obviously it's new, but it's all hewn, and while we did use chain mortisers and things like that to do the joinery, everything visible is hand done. So there's no machine marks anywhere. Francois Calam, who started CSF, he was a big part of making that happen. And while, or just before we were doing the Truss 6 build in DC with Hans House, CSF was building a truss, a reconstruction of Truss 7 in Paris, right in front of the cathedral, to show, you know, as an example, just like we were doing, yes, this can be done, this is possible, to try and refute all these news articles saying, oh, you know, it couldn't possibly happen. The truck here, everybody's seen logs before, but we probably used, I think it was around 1,100 logs, about this big, you know, they're like 13 meters long, beautiful white oak logs, truck after truck after truck, and you know, while there was a huge amount of work to be done, you know, with the joinery and the hewing, also a big part of this project, honestly, was just dealing with all this material. So when we came, Perot was doing the design work, and they had their design bureau creating the shop drawings for us to work off of, and I think just to save money, they hire almost exclusively interns and in their design bureau, which I have to say makes a complicated project immeasurably more difficult. So we were always, until the last piece, we were always waiting on design, on shop drawings. And when they would come, they would often be wrong, and fortunately, you know, there was enough talent that we were working with, the carpenters, who could look at these drawings, and we would talk, you know, we would just always be talking about the details and looking at it and being able to see where the issues were, and fortunately we were able to catch most things and turn those drawings around. Anyways, the hope was to be able to hew concurrently as we cut the joinery, so, you know, we hew out the timbers for one truss, we cut that truss, we don't have to have a whole bunch of hewn timbers just sitting and waiting, but because the drawings took so long to be completed, we had to do almost all of our hewing in the very beginning of the project. So for the first few months that we were there, we were just hewing timbers. And then finally, we're able to start working. Just an example, using a traditional French axe to do the jugging with. We did use a chainsaw, mostly to cut the notches, what we call jugging, and then split those off. And there were some prescriptions about the kind of axe that we were using. We couldn't use bright bile, we could only use sort of French-style DuBois, which is a single beveled axe. We were not allowed to use a double beveled axe at all, because in looking at the existing structure when it was studied, it was obvious that double beveled axes were not used. And also, as Jackson mentioned, the quality of hewing, you know, had to be kept very high. They wanted to see no échelle de Papeau, which is the toad ladder. So at any little, like when you make a hewing cut and then another one, if they're slightly offset, they didn't want to see any of that. You had to have these perfect scallops all the way through. And then as part of the hewing, you know, we had to leave these chunks where the timbers were thicker for these sections where the other timbers came in and joined them, because there were all these little, they were decorative but also structural sections where the timbers had a little shelf where they got a little thicker for the horizontal beams to come in and sit on. And so we hewed for months, and then it was a matter of keeping all of this stuff, you know, it's all labeled. And kind of interestingly, and it'll be really interesting to go back and see how this is studied in the future, but every log was documented as to where it came from, who felled the tree, when was it felled, and then also who hewed the log and who did the joinery. And this was kept, this information was all kept down and put in a database. And so there's a database somewhere where you can look at every single piece that's in this frame and say, you know, this is where this log came from. And this will be interesting to see in the future to be able to go back and say, okay, you know, looking at the frame, this is how things have dried, this is how things have moved and twisted. Okay, was it cut in the winter? Was it cut in the summer? Where was it from? And so some interesting study that's available to happen. Sorry if I say all the time. So this is the workshop, and here we're laying out the emboss, the base. So the long timbers with the joinery, well, the large long timbers going across the shop are the chords of the principal trusses. So there's, in the nave, there are 11 principal trusses, and then between every principal truss, there are 4 common trusses. And then at either end, in between the last principal truss and the steeple, there was another 4 common trusses, and then between the nave, the first primary truss and the bell tower, there was 6 common trusses. So it was a lot of work that we had to do, and I was there for about 8 months, the first 8 months of last year, and I got there just after they had started hewing and left, and they were just trucking the first timbers to Paris to be raised. So they pretty much did this entire job in about 8-9 months of the cutting the frame. And we raised this frame in a tent out back of the shop, just to be able to say, well, for one, to make sure that everything went together perfectly, and to be able to take pictures, and so that if there was any issues down the road, we could show, you know, no, this went together just the way it should have. It was sitting on the correct waypoints. You know, if there's any issues, that might be because of the masons or something else, but we wanted to make sure that we were fairly unassailable. Because in a project like this, you know, where there's so much scrutiny on it, you certainly wouldn't want to bring all your timbers to Paris and put them together and have issues and have to bring them back to the shop or be repairing them on site. As Jackson was saying, model making is a big thing, and so just like in Assalon's shop, we're making full-scale models of all the details, all the joinery, and so this is just one example of the details. So these are the aiguille pendant, so the rope that's on the left, that would actually be the top. This thing rotates upwards, and those sections clasp the cords and then also go up past all the other members. They're offset, and they clasp multiple, the principal rafter and the top cord and a couple other members, and these are keeping the cords from being able to bow downwards and also supporting the walkway. An example of the trusses. So if you know anything about scribe work, you have to lay up each section. And so first we laid up the emboss, the base, and because the nave is about 62 meters long, I think. I believe that's correct. We only had enough room to lay up half, or just over half, in the workshop, and then take it apart and lay up the other half. And then every truss was laid up, and because these trusses had so much detail on them, so many pieces connect to each other. We would have to do it in multiple layups. So first we're laying up, maybe 6 or 8 pieces, and then we're doing another layup, and sometimes even a third layup to be able to sit all of these pieces into these trusses. And the trusses are all different. The primary trusses are quite a bit different among the 11. So it's not like you can just have one drawing and go off of that. They're quite different in terms of where the pieces are and just in terms of how many pieces they have. Not only with how they were repaired over time, so like these aiguilles pendant, the vertical pieces on the left, those were added, and so we're storing it or replicating it, but replicating it to the point where it was before it burned. And part of that replication was creating a roof line which replicated exactly the roof line of the trusses as they were, with 800 years of settling. So while there was quite a bit of rolling up and down, the walls roughly did this. One wall went downwards and one wall rose as you came away from the bell towers. And the ridge line made this great swooping arc. And so we recreated all of these off-angle, off-kilter things, which is a special challenge. Really the only things that were different about this framing is that while the trusses were angled, all of the vertical members were actually plumb within the truss, whereas in the old trusses, those vertical members would have been off plumb as the trusses became out of camber or off kilter because of the walls settling differently. And if you know anything about scribe, there's a good reason for that. Would have been quite a bit of a degree of difficulty more to be able to have those vertical members be out of plumb. And then on the left-hand picture, you can see this is one of the secondary trusses. Secondary trusses are fairly more simple, still with quite a bit of pieces that need to go together really nicely. And some of the other things that were different, and like Jackson said, we know a lot about what the foray, the trusses looked like, but only on the outsides, and we don't know anything about what that joinery was. So that joinery was decided by the architects, but with a lot of input by carpenters who were well versed in historic restoration in French buildings, obviously. And so as much as possible, we tried to replicate what would have been built, the joinery style in which it was built at that time. Although there were a few details like the joints at the ends, at the heels of the trusses, where most of the forces, where the engineers had us add some slightly more complicated joints to be able to take more of that bearing. And if folks have questions as I'm talking, feel free to throw a hand up. So this is the tent in which we did the lavagement, the white raising or temporary raising. On the left you can see we did a hand raising for the second primary truss, and this was really just to show for the architects and the foresters. The foresters were a big part of this because the government was donating a lot of the wood, and then we also had some private landowners come and visit us at that same time because they were also donating wood. So the wood came from all over France, but not just out of government-owned property. And so we did this hand raising both to show that it could be done and also to show, to show off for these folks who are coming and hope to see a little bit of a spectacle. And then you can see this giant tent where we raised this entire thing, which was really neat to see it in one place. Another nice thing about having to raise it once is that when it was raised in Paris, they were immediately decking all 3 floors. Well, actually 4 floors. So as you might have seen in some of Jackson's pictures, there's decking all the way up and down, and then there's this big firewall that's built at the end. So it's very hard to get a clear view. You can't look upwards at all. All you see is plywood. So here, at least, we were able to, walk through it and really get a sense of the scale of it, which is a wonderful thing. Just some more pictures of it finished. I recently went back to Paris. They had a little ceremony, just a bouquet laying to celebrate the finish of the framing. So the timber framing was all done, and not all, but some of the carpenters were able to come. Mostly, I think everyone was invited, but it was more that folks are busy, but folks were able to come and just have a little bit of a celebration for the finishing of the framing. And then just some details. Honestly, there's so many beautiful parts about this frame, it's a little hard to pick anything, but there's a lot of interesting joinery in this frame. So that middle picture is the nave, and then the right-hand picture is the apse, which is that section on the far end that Perrault built. And then there's a video. I think this will play. So this just shows what you can see inside, but I mean here you can see those multiple layers of flooring, so there's no point at which you can see up and down through this. And then right now it's being sheathed, they're almost unsheathing it. Our friend Hank Silver, who worked on this project, he worked all through the raising and then has been working sheeting boards, sheeting the roof. Which, God bless him, I was offered to sheathe, but I didn't think it was something I really wanted to do. It's just a lot of oak boards that are getting a heck of a lot of really long nails put into them. So.
Sorry, you don't have a video.
That's okay. And then I think this might be it, but this is just the bell towers. And so during the fire, one of the bell towers was pretty well damaged, so it's a wooden inner structure that holds the bells. And that is being restored right now by Perrault, and then the other one was in quite good shape. But past there you can see the spire and the phoenix. And I think that's it. Are there any? Please. Yes, a single bevel. Yep. The flat side is towards the surface. Yep. And when I say single bevel, there is a very, very slight back bevel, but it's extremely slight. So you lap your axe, you make it perfectly flat, and then maybe just a few swipes with the honing or sharpening stone, because otherwise it'll dig in too much. But the nice thing about a single bevel axe is you can use that face to glide along the face of your timber, and for me, I think it's a little bit easier. A double bevel axe. I can use a double bevel axe, but I find it just slightly more difficult. Because you don't have something to register against the timber quite as much. Please.
I understand hewing is a very hard work. You hew like months. How can you stand it every day?
Well, they're French, so they take hour-and-a-half lunches and things like this. Really, we found that working maybe hewing 4 days a week is really the best, but unfortunately we just didn't have that luxury of being able to hew for less time because we didn't have the joinery to cut. How do you do it? I mean, it's hard at first, and then your muscles get used to it. It's like any sort of hard work, I guess. But in general, 3.5 to 4 days a week out of 5 is I think the best amount of hewing to be doing in terms of getting the best product out of a crew and keeping them happy and healthy. Because there were certainly some people who start to suffer from muscle tendon issues, overwork of their arms. Yeah.
Any other questions? Are there any other questions?
Mr. Matt, do you have a question, a comment? Okay, well, thank you all so much.
Is it on now? There we go. Okay. As we're getting to the end of the day, this is going to be one of our last presentations. It's going to be a panel discussion. The participants are going to be Douglas Reed, Jackson, and Elios, and myself. And we're going to be talking about restoration, preservation, and old people. Okay, this will be our panel discussion. Does anybody have any questions about restoration to start us off with? In the audience? David? No questions? No. Okay. Jackson, what does restoration mean to you?
To return something to its original, to attempt to return something to its original state, I guess.
Okay. What does restoration mean to you?
There are 4 R's: remodeling, renovation, rehabilitation, and restoration. Restoration's at the top of the pack. You can restore to a building such as the Spire, if you will, back to exactly the way it was, or take a building back to a certain period that it was, but it's very detailed work.
Alice? Restoration, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I do. It does to me personally. It's a very multifaceted issue. Is it purely physical? Is it the physical appearance of the element that you're restoring? Is it the technology behind that? Is it the? Does it also incorporate the history of the piece itself? Yeah, that I do agree. It's a very multifaceted question.
Yeah, it's a big question. What restoration means to me is preserving our past and preserving our buildings to make it available for future generations to come, which is, I think, is very important.
I would add that in the reconstruction of the Spire specifically, that was not a restoration of the Spire, it was a work of restoration of the church, but it was a reconstruction of the Spire.
Yeah, which is part of our preservation, because if we didn't have the knowledge or the skills to pass on, like we were discussing with our last presenter, it's like, hey, we don't have the skills, how can it be done? And a lot of people were saying this can't be done. And yeah, we proved it could be done, and it still can be done. And that's part of preservation, is being able to pass these skills on and these trades and learning how this stuff was done and how we can accomplish it and move forward.
Yeah. Before you can preserve the building, you have to preserve the trade.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So Jackson, how many old buildings need attention where you live?
Oh, where I live in central New York, I pass more decaying barns than I can count on one hand, anyways, just on my trip to the grocery store. The agricultural landscape in particular has been really left in a sad state just because of the expense of maintaining the building and also kind of a lack of, we don't any longer need threshing floors or stalls for oxen and storage for loose hay. The whole operation of a farm has just totally changed. And so unless you have a specific use for the building, which is usually going to be a wedding venue or something like this, but we do have locally tax incentives for people to do work on their own barns. But on the list of structures that need attention and preservation, I would say that my house is at the top of the list.
Well, that's interesting. So in New York, there's, for that area, there's tax incentives for restorative farms?
Yep, New York State has a tax incentive for, I think it's 20% of the total cost. And the only limitation being that you can't, you have to be trying to return the barn to something close to the original state. You just can't take it from being unconditioned space to being a conditioned space. But it's quite a significant tax return that you get to do that kind of work.
I don't think that's available in my state, in Wisconsin. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess these are programs. This is why we discussed this, because I didn't even know these programs were available.
Well, I don't know about your state level, but in the United States, there's a listing of historic properties for the National Register. And if you're on the National Register, you're eligible to earn a 20% tax credit. Now, a credit is a dollar-for-dollar trade-off of what your tax liability is a year. If your state adopts their program, you can get up to 40%. If they adopt for instance, if you take an old building and renovate it for housing, for low-income housing, you get another 5 to 10%. We package many buildings up to 50% of the cost is supported by the taxpayer, allowing these expensive projects to get done and not lose the building. Very, very valuable tool for our bonds.
So how many old buildings are by where you live that need restoration?
I'm from Maryland, and Maryland is just north of Washington, D.C., the capital, and that's considered the mid-Atlantic region. That's Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and that's a big area. And I guess I was young and woolly one day, and I wanted to move. So one of my clients sat me down. We have interstates, like your big roads. And Interstate 70 and 81 crossing, he said, do a study of how many buildings, the historic buildings in the United States are within a tank full of gas in each of the directions. That's 600-mile diameter. That went from New York down to Richmond. We had 55% of the historic buildings of all the United States where I live centered on Hagerstown. I would say easily, now buildings, as soon as you get them done, they start to go. Maintenance is an ongoing annual performance, or they have life cycles of 5 years and 10 years, and then every 80 years, an old building generally gets a major workup. So if I was working on a building dated 1740, it's already in its fourth stage. So I would say 15% of the buildings are always pretty much in great need of huge rehab resources. And every building is in need of an annual maintenance review. And you've got to know your life cycles for roof. Average is 20 years. You have to know your recycle for paint. Average is 2 to 3 years on flat surfaces. It's 5 to 7 years on vertical surfaces. You have to know what side of the building you're getting hit with your weather. So just having somebody around to watch the buildings. It's a huge market. If you are unemployed, come over. I'll get you a job right away. We need people who know what they're doing.
Now, same question to you. How many historic buildings or restoration buildings where you live? And is there any government incentives to help with that?
I think in terms of how many derelict buildings I see that are in need of renovation, well, even driving here, we see tons of homesteads where you have a farm, you have a homestead where you have the main dwelling, you have the barn, you have the granary, whatever. And as over the last 100 years, these auxiliary buildings have all lost their main function, which means that there are a ton of square meters for the homeowner that need to be maintained to be heated. And if the buildings are no longer used for agriculture or animal husbandry, what is the owner supposed to do with these buildings? What do you do with a 200 square meter barn, for example? If you're not dealing in agriculture anymore, okay, perhaps you can reinvent it into some sort of a guest house. But there's only so many guest houses and workshops that you can have in an area that you perhaps can rent out or invite tourists. So I do see that these sort of summer residences and apartments are somewhat used in Estonia for such homesteads where there's too many buildings that a single person would use, but that's not a viable option for all buildings here, basically. But yeah, also in terms of, I think there's also nuance whenever we're discussing restoration or renovation. Restoration is restoring the original condition of the building, but as soon as you want to add modern conveniences or added insulation, is it restoration anymore, or is it careful renovation, basically?
But just like we're talking about in the conference, I think it's even with some of these older buildings, since they're not being used, we need to find a purpose for them versus just letting them rot away, because it costs a lot of money to build a new building. So it's I think that's a good effort on everybody's part in our community to try to figure out how to repurpose these buildings and do something with them so they just don't get wasted. Like I was talking about in my presentation, it's some of these buildings, if you were the one that was to build that building, I mean, you'd probably be crying if seeing it that, it's in disarray the way it is. So what products are you using for restoration, or what do you consider reasonable products to use for restoration in your trade?
Well, my home, for instance, is a 200-year-old farmhouse vernacular Greek revival in central New York. When I purchased my home, it had been abandoned and empty for over 6 years. Even in that state, the interior was still fine because it had a good roof and it had a good foundation. Had that building been sealed up, say with spray foam insulation or any type of insulation, and then say latex paint or some of these non-breathable surfaces, if somebody had come and put all new windows in there, when I bought that house, it would have been a mold farm. It would have been a serious problem, without constant mechanical ventilation. So a lot of products that are utilized in modern renovations of modern buildings have to really be carefully considered and balanced with one another. If you're going to, do air sealing, then you need to have highly technical and well-balanced return air, etc. So say in my home, I'm going to allow it to be breathable, which means that it will not necessarily be needing...
Be a mold problem?
It won't be a mold problem. It also won't it won't meet the energy expectations of a brand new home. But since this is for me personally, and that's always a discussion to have with the homeowner, is what is the desired end use of the structure? Especially with some buildings or some residences, we have a whole concern in the States of universal design and aging in place. So sometimes folks, even though there's not room for a bathroom on the first floor, if it's a difference between being able to age in place or go to a nursing home, and you figure that out. You might need to be making some spaces accessible by accessible and bringing all of the facilities down to the first floor. And there are things that we just need to do to make sure that these buildings are still useful and lovable for people and making our lives better. So it depends highly on the end use, but I think that trying to utilize products that were at least similar in philosophy and function as the ones that were originally used are going to probably have an ideal result.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, I started in 1972, and in 1974 they came out with a new slate, handmade, or I should say man-made slate product. And the slate product was called Superdoor. It was made out of concrete and asbestos. It's supposed to last 100 years, and it was half the cost of real slate. Well, I got involved with that, and we put it on a couple of roofs, and after 9 years, it had to be replaced. And that happened, that company's product was so inferior. All of us builders who adopted that product learned a hard lesson. Don't trust a new product that says it's been advanced tested and it's out there for 50 years and it's only been on somebody's building for 10 years. So right away I started looking at, well, how did my forefathers start to rehab their buildings when they got to 80 years old? And they used the natural stuff that it was built with. And it made a lot of sense. So we started to go backwards and look at how did they make a paint? How did they make a stain? What did they do to flash a window, flash a door? What was the particular type of wood? Not just the type of wood, but how was the grain in the piece of wood being used for a window cap, for instance? Gosh, most of the 18th century window flashings I've seen are made out of wood. And it was all vertical grain laid horizontally, very, very, I mean, they didn't have caulk. We use caulk. They didn't have caulk, so it was just plain good carpentry, really tight, understanding that in the humid summer, and we have very bad humidity, it was going to move, and they allowed for that. So we studied how they used to do it. And I had a rule in my company, if we were doing a normal 1780 residential house, was 2 stories, about 2,500 feet, I would not let them use more than 1 case of 6 tubes of caulk, or otherwise they would fire. And they understood that. And so the carpentry increased, and the joints were better, and we understood how in the 18th and the 19th century, they put things together that accommodated no caulk. Now, they did have a caulking for ships, and what it is a cotton or a flax that was twisted, and then they had tar and oil. And we did use that. You can still get that. So we were looking at old products. We adopted a historic roofing chapter in my company who could do slate, who could do standing seam, flat solder seam. We had a whole tin shop going right up until the point, the thing that killed that in the United States, we lost the people who were making the steel product we needed. And in 1987, they had that, the Parts Service put on a roofing conference. And even in 1987, they knew that the copper being made today, even if it was lead coated, would last 50 years, that's it. You had to replace it. Whereas the Second National Bank in Philadelphia has 1792 copper still in place. It's the difference in the manufacture of the product. And Follows-Me Steel stopped making the steel. So we had to shut that down. We still do, well, I don't do it anymore, but we had slate, and we can get really good slate. So we were using natural products.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's what I like about coming to Europe. It's like you see all these old buildings and how can this still stand. I mean, when I was in Italy in Pomerado, there's a bridge that was made out of stone that was 2,500 years old and it's still standing. Yet we can't make something like that today. It's like, what's going on? Why is that? Why is some of this technology lost?
You know, I had Rudy Christian. Out in Ohio, they have a barn outfit called the Friends of Ohio Barns. They have a yearly conference. We went out there 2 years ago, and we toured a 2-year-old modern wooden covered bridge that carried big 18-wheelers with 93,000 pounds that had to carry 3 trucks at a time. A modern wooden bridge. And this guy, Ohio, is a major state in our country, has lots of wooden bridges, is still in use. And this engineer got to thinking, these bridges are 100, 125, 135 years old. Why not? Why are we using concrete and steel when they fail in 50 years? And they have to replace the bridges. So he got the federal government and the state government, as long as they met a certain standard, to allow him to design a wooden bridge. And it was stunning. It's really stunning. Were you out there then?
No.
So we can. Technology, we good? Whatever. So don't give up. I'm not a fan too much of steel products and wooden buildings. They're great. They fight each other. We just finished a barn, and I was the team leader, so I refused every time that an engineer would come and say, you have to use steel here. I said, no, I don't have to. It's just because he was saying that, and we would show him another method that was a wood method. Barns like each other if they're wood with metal fasteners, but not some piece of steel or a steel rod. That just rocks a heck out of a barn. So use the old methods as much as you can. Look into, it's just like we were hearing here a little. Can you hear me? All right. It's just like we heard here this morning. The more a natural product is used, the less your CO output. I was involved in a study a couple of years ago, and the government asked us is it from a carbon output emission standard, is it better to tear down an old building and recreate it, not in detail or exactly like, but the same cubic footage, take down a 100 square foot building and put up a 100 square foot building? Which is carbon better for the world? And I was stunned at the outcome, but to take an old building, even in poor condition, and rehabilitate it to modern standards is 900% CO emission less than to tear it down, throw it away, and bring everything from China and Europe over to the United States and recreate that building. 900% less. So if you stay with the old building and use old products and use old methods as much as reasonably practical, you're going to have a superior building.
Yeah, that was the same question.
Well, in terms of materials, I had like 5 thoughts and I lost most of them already, but in terms of materials, I do agree with most of what you two have also said, that we need to understand how these old buildings were built. And in terms of if we want to renovate them and add insulation, I've noticed that while stone buildings are relatively forgiving as far as we know in terms of different materials to use, like mineral, glass wall, foam insulations that have become more prevalent and become invented and then prevalent over the last 100 years, they kind of had a moment where they were being used on wooden buildings, and then we've decided to realize that perhaps oil-based or mineral-based insulation materials might not be the best solution for wooden buildings. In terms of not only in Estonia, we would have examples not only of spray foam insulation against log, but simply having like the white expanded polyurethane boards basically just placed against log facades with no answer to the question of how do you provide air tightness, how do you fit against the grooves of a log building, how do you handle moisture. because thing is, like foam insulation it is awful with moisture again. It can be vapor permeable, like POR foams are in Estonia basically advertised to be that it's okay in terms of vapor, which can be, if it has an open cellular structure, vapor, that might be true, that the vapor can pass, but there's still the question, if there is condensation, if the water droplets appear between the wood and the foam, it does not dry out. It is impossible. So there's like two aspects to it. It's the vapor and the physical water that can be through condensation or through leakages or through, perhaps during construction there was rain, the wall got wet, then you install the insulation and now the moisture is trapped there. And even with mineral and glass wool, there's the issue that they don't bind moisture. Natural materials, if there's vapor or even if there's open water, they have the ability to absorb it to a certain degree. I had some colleagues from Finland describing a study where they have the different types of wool insulation materials and they simply poured water on it. And they described that while mineral wool binded nothing, they compared it with sawdust insulation, and it took like 9 liters of like water that you can continue to pour on it, and it sort of absorbs it in a way that the moisture doesn't specifically get to the wooden elements, and meaning that there isn't a danger for like wood rot. And the thing is, with mineral wool, it has better insulation properties, and if these wooden structures do get moisture wet in a way, there's potential for drying, but there's still the issue that if there's condensation, the wool itself can dry, but in the case where there's so many water droplets, it ends at the bottom. Let's say the wool is between a wooden frame. The moisture ends up against the bottom, elements of the wood, of like the wooden structure holding the wool, and that wood has no potential for drying out anymore, actually. So where I want to get to is that natural wool materials, like from cellulose wool, it has the ability to absorb the water, actually. So in a way, we arrived back at the moment at the realization that natural materials work together, like natural insulation works best with natural construction methods like wood, basically. It's not just the case of wool versus foam, it's more actually a case of natural source or artificial source, basically.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in Europe, but in the United States, a lot of these manufacturers, when they come out with new products, all of a sudden years later, there's huge lawsuits, and even with stains, sealants, finishes, house wraps, spray foams, asbestos products, going back to some of the old ways is still the best ways, and I think we're all starting to realize that hey, that makes a big difference going back to natural products, because it's like you can't go wrong.
I actually have another example where there was a study done by one of our colleagues where he inventoried renovated facades, and he noticed that paint that is too watertight, basically the facade boards were relatively new, only a couple of years old, and the paint was fine, but it was soft, like you can press through it, basically. Or like if you chip the paint away, you see that the wood is just black. And that is another a major renovation mistake that people are doing. They're using the wrong kinds of paint that is not compatible with wood, basically.
Yeah, that was like the restoration in Montebello. I mean, they were using paint back in the day, and it just would trap the moisture in, and then it'd act like a micro greenhouse and just amplify the rot situation. So it's like, hey, when it comes to restoration, you got to be careful on what you're using, otherwise you can, create a bigger problem than what you already have.
One of the things we want to talk about is environment.
Environment?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the environment, Doc.
Well, these
houses,
these houses were built with thousands of years of trial and error construction improvements in the environment within which they existed in the 18th through the 19th century. There was a lot of transpiration with outside and inside. And today, whole goal is to seal the house, stop that air loss, stop that heat from getting out, stop the heat from coming in the summertime. And when I hear that word seal, S-E-A-L, I keep telling people, put a plastic bag on your head and how long are you going to last? 2 days before I flew to come out here, a customer had me down to look at their log house, and the bottom 4 logs are literally falling out of the wall. Oak. This isn't cheap junk wood. This is oak. It's about an 1850 log house. I hadn't seen that. I saw the year before the house, and it was punky, but it was such a rapid acceleration of deterioration. I was shocked. So we started to pull the log apart, and all I did, I got one end of the log, and I grabbed a whole 1/8 inch thick of a rubber-like elastomeric material that somebody kept trying to paint on there, coat after coat, to seal it against the water. And they trapped all the water in the inside so that it couldn't breathe. That's something that we have to be worried about on the entire envelope. We have to get a higher standard of insulation on these buildings now. It used to be no standard until 1973, and now we're up to about a 50 R in the ceilings and so on. And for us, that's getting up there. It's achievable, but you have to allow for mechanical makeup of air. And so what my company has been trying to do is to convince the government what happens if your electric grid goes down and you have an active air exchange going on that's produced by electricity. So what we're doing is allowing certain amount of air to come in through the windows and the doors. And of course, if you have a house that's actively lived in, you're getting that exchange. But we're trying to find reasonable ways to insulate and not trap water on the inside. There are 9 ways for water to get in the house, and it's just not a roof leak. And so we have to follow water, and we have to watch out that we don't change the environment that the house was lived in and built in, or you're going to sweat that house to death. You'll ruin it. And that's a real trick today with the windows and doors that we're putting in. They're really high quality. They're very solid and tight, better than they've ever had. I'm an advocate of that because that's where most of your heat loss is, through the openings. But if we don't learn to bring in air and exchange that moisture from the inside to the outside, nature likes an equilibrium. And in the wintertime, we have a low humidity, and it wants that to be the same on the inside. And then that'll trade off. So as long as we get that trade-off, your house will survive.
In terms of moisture, but also I think I would like to add that people are showering more than they used to 100 years ago. Basically, we have old buildings, but we have washing machines. We are doing the dishes. We have a whole larger moisture load actually indoors now that these old houses used to have, basically. So that is also one of the reasons why we actually do need to speak about moisture barriers and ventilation. It's not something that just randomly popped up. There's a clear explanation why these buildings might not be able to function the way that they were built because we're not using them the same way when they were built.
Especially when you have unlimited hot water shower. But with the preservation aspect, I mean, with old buildings, when do you say it's like, it's too far gone, I don't think we can restore this? Or it's like, no matter what condition it is, I think we can fix it? It's kind of a loaded question, but
I think it's how committed you are, basically.
yeah,
Right.
Because in terms of like restoration, every building in the end, if you want to keep it going and going and going for centuries, it's like, what is that, like Greek ship myth that basically you replace every element in it? It looks the same, but every element has been already changed in it, basically, or like switched out for. So I think it's a similar question as as that if it's possible to restore, if it's acceptable to restore a building, and we can accept that in the end every element of the building can be changed out, then I think if you have the commitment, you have the funds, you have the workforce, you have the skills, then you can basically do anything you put your heart to. Basically. How reasonable it is another question, or in a financial manner, or perhaps in a philosophical manner. But yeah, I think it's about commitment.
Yeah, because I know you restored your house, and we're currently restoring a couple of buildings in downtown Milwaukee. They were built in the 1900s. And a lot of people looked at me like I was crazy. But since I know how to do the work, it's cost effective to restore these buildings. So then it makes sense to restore them, and it brought back the neighborhood, and it just was really interesting to me when I restore old buildings, just the history that you find and run into. It's like, I found snake oil that used to be old medicine years ago that was sold by a snake oil salesperson. So, and it just, when I remodel these old buildings, I just try to bring myself back in time, because the one building that we had, it didn't even have electricity. The lights were still powered by gas, so there was all the old gas lines in these buildings. And I just couldn't imagine trying to light a match to turn on your light, how dangerous that would be.
Yeah, it's always a conversation with all of the builders that came before you.
Yeah.
And my partner will tell me what she thinks is muttering to myself, but I'm trying to figure out what the heck this guy did 150 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, and
There's very much dialogue.
yeah, and that's part of the restoration, because I'm not sure about your buildings, but where I come from in Milwaukee area in Wisconsin, we have a lot of nationalities there. We have the Germans, we have the Norwegians that settled in there, we have the Italians, the Polish, and it's just like, okay, the mix of carpentry and the skills that were brought over from the old world, I'm not able to distinguish, oh, this section was built by the Polish people, or this section was built by the Italians or the Germans. It's just like, when it comes to preservation, all that comes into play about who's doing it and how this technology is being passed on. And it was just like we were talking before, with some of the old technology, it's like the fireplaces used to be built on the outside of the building, and like in Estonia, they brought it back in. They brought the fireplaces out to put more room in the house, but it's like, that's not practical with the thermal mass, and now we're bringing them back into the building. So it's like, okay, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we, are going back to the old ways. So it's part of the preservation, is looking at what our ancestors have done and kind of realize what's happening, what's going on. It's like, hey, maybe the old way isn't such a bad way. Would you agree on that?
Indeed.
Yeah.
It's always relatively, it's always dependent on the situation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of old ways. I like having ancient meanings.
One of the ways that we saved more buildings than most builders was because of cost. Everybody sitting out here probably thinks that to restore or high renovation of a historic building costs more than to tear it down and build new. You're dead wrong. Yes, there are projects like Notre Dame, cost me damn. I worked on 10 presidential buildings out of our 45 that we've had in 250 years. And they had the money to do really special work, but for the 99% of the people that I work for, people just like you, and you don't have deep pockets. And I had to compete with your desire to have an old building versus being able to afford a new building if you can't afford the old building. So I tracked the numbers. I was the bidder, I was the owner, nobody between me and the guys out in the field. I knew what it cost. And I knew that new construction in those days was going for around $125 a square foot new from land up, turnkey. And by golly, we really worked hard to train our men and women. I have great hands-on craft women, and we had to stay at or below that 125 a square foot, at least comparable to it. And we would put the money into the character-defining features that made that house special for whatever period it was in. But the rest of it, we would do everything we could to keep that cost down. So don't think that you can't take somebody through a project and you're not spending needless funding. It should be close if you really know your projects. It should be pretty close.
As what makes you like your trade in restoration? What got you involved and what's your passion about it?
Well, I'm more involved in actually renovation. The question of how do you combine old with new? So it's not only restoring what you have, it's modernizing in a way that you keep the original in a way. So in Estonia, we have these. We have heritage buildings, they're in the National Registry, they're protected, but then we have this sort of unrecognized heritage within the building stock, where everyone can recognize it's a valuable building, but for one reason or another, it just can't be placed under heritage protection or defined as a milieu valuable area. We have two kinds of protection types in Estonia. And the thing with those buildings is I see how people are like renovating them, and it kind of breaks your heart in a way where you can see that the homeowner is doing their best, but to replicate the level of skill, or even to find the craftsman because when you renovate the building, the most common thing is what you do is add insulation to the exterior walls, basically. But then your walls are becoming offset for like 20-30 centimeters. That's gonna influence your overhang length. That's gonna cover up architectural details. That means that you need to bring your windows out, or even the whole question of windows, as I showed in my presentation. It's very challenging to find an architecturally a window solution that makes sense, because in terms of building physics, like just a single frame, a single pane of glass makes the most sense, basically. In the 1920s and 30s, having the largest pane of glass was a mark of pride, basically. Homeowners wanted the biggest windows you had. That was the whole deal with modernism. But now we're kind of realizing that these sort of big panes are not very compatible with the architecture of an old building. You should still have some of like the old window divisions, but then we have examples in Estonia where like window producers just like glue it on basically, and then it comes loose in 10 years. So the overall impression of the window becomes very haphazard very soon. But then again, having the funds to have this sort of restored, authentic window division with energy-efficient glass, it becomes very expensive for a classic homeowner. And so, like, this is just one example of the many questions that the owners of these valuable buildings that are not specifically protected but need to be renovated in a respectful way. Because going back to my earlier presentation again, if we renovate them in a poor way, if we cut corners, if we don't respect the original heritage of the building, okay, we improve its energy performance. Okay, the building looks nice, let's say, but if it looks very cookie cutter to like catalog buildings from Finland or Sweden, there is no real character to them anymore. And then I just feel like the next generation will simply see that, oh, those are those buildings that we messed up with renovations and they deserve to be torn down, and then the entire life cycle of the buildings are cut short because if we destroy the heritage and it's beyond saving, then basically I'm painting a sort of a grim picture, but it's just one of my main concerns right now, basically. And trying to solve these questions is what mainly inspires me in my work with finding the solutions and understanding the limitations of the homeowner and finding these compromises between like cost, the heritage, the architecture, the energy performances, etc.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I hate about my country is the good and the bad. It's like, okay, for the people that are from Greece, we have the famous Bucks player Giannis, and we just built a brand new stadium for the Bucks to play in, and the old stadium was not even 30 years old, and they destroyed the whole building to put a brand new building in. I mean, that's just crazy. And this stuff goes on like this in the United States, and it just, I mean, I can understand why the Europeans hate the Americans, because we are so wasteful. It just makes me sick. Sorry, I gotta say that, but Jackson, last question. How do you plan on passing your knowledge to the next generation, or what do you think we need to do to pass on our heritage?
Well, thankfully it won't just be my knowledge I'm responsible for, because that's fairly limited. But I'm honored to be in a position where it's my responsibility to timber framers via the Timber Framers Guild and our school, the Hartwood School, as well as our publication, the Timber Framing Journal, and connecting young people from various institutions in the United States, trade institutions, whether it be the Northern Institute School or the American College for the Building Arts, helping connect those folks who are studying in an academic environment to people out in the field. We just had our traditional timber framing research advisory group conference meeting, and the topic of that was bridging generations, and the acknowledgement that there is a generational change that's happening since kind of the revival that happened in the timber framing world in the United States in the 70s. We've got a lot of young people that are coming into it that are very interested. More and more of them, I would say that the traditional wing of the timber framing group is growing rapidly, so much that it makes some folks nervous. They're not used to it being a big thing, full of youngsters. But I feel like that's an absolutely a positive thing, and I'm honored to have that as my responsibility to help make these connections.
Yeah, that'd be pretty amazing. Maybe we need to come up with an Xbox game on log building. So what about
We can do it.
So what about you for restoration? How do you plan on preserving the past?
Well, I had tried to extend my knowledge to a bunch of other people, but they've all passed away, believe it or not. It's amazing. What I've done is I'm on my 6th book. I'm going to try to get that out in the next year or two. And the title is What Not to Do with the Log Building. Don't strip it. Don't plastic it up with a bunch of elastomerics. The other thing is when I get probably $1 million worth of calls every week, and I give it away to other people. And then I go out and what to do for buildings, how to perform it. I'm trying to preserve the knowledge by training other contractors who really don't know much about renovation, but there's not enough of us out there in the Mid-Atlantic region. And the other way is TTRAG, Timber Framers Guild in the United States, one of the best recognized organizations to continue and train a craft in the United States. And they are truly doing a very good job. The other side of that is the International Log Builders Association. Now, the Timber Framers Guild has a really cool subgroup called TTRAG. It's Traditional Timber Framing Research and Advisory Group. Now, I've been through several universities. I've taught in 3 or 4. I was a student in 2. I know some of the higher up muckety mucks in the scholar line. None of them will equal what you get from a hands-on historian like in TTRAG. When I go up there, I just sit there and listen, because we are required, there's only 30 members that work on historic buildings, but they're just like me. They go out and learn everything they can about the history of the craft. And so when you hear a Jack Sobel or Jackson or somebody like that talking, Jan Lewandowski. I would love for Miles to get involved again. You know, you're hearing stuff that's hundreds of years old coming out of the building. Oh, that's how they did it. Now, a guy that we know, David Rogers, was very interested in International Log Building Association and trying to get a T-track started in that. And he and I taught a little bit of history in 2005, but it just didn't take. And so he continued with it, and tragically and sadly, we lost him last year. And the other thing that we lost was Don Carpentier, who, wow, he taught a lot of craft training at Eastfield Village in New York. And so they're down, but there's a foundation that survives him. And so that is still going. So I'm trying to lend what little information I have to them, spreading it out to other contractors, teaching other people where I can. And then I've got to get these books written before I'm dust in the grave. So
Hurry it up, Doug.
we're working.
Okay, make it quick.
Well, I can indeed speak that the Estonian Open Air Museum organizes events for homeowners where homeowners are invited to come speak about their experience when restoring or renovating their buildings, and we have events for specialists where we can educate them on different aspects of renovation and heritage. And then we occasionally publish some information material, and we have a website, and yeah, we're doing all kinds of communication.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm doing is I started the website, Ask Kevin, and that's where homeowners can go and ask questions about their house on how to maintain it and take care of it. And so it's going to be free information because I feel it's much needed. So, does anybody else have any questions before we wrap her up? Preservation, restoration? Okay. Thank you. Well, that wraps up the conference. I think it was a fantastic conference. I learned a lot of information. It was well worth for me coming here. Again, I'm very honored to be here and be the host and be able to present. I mean, like I said, this was my first country I visited when I came to Europe in 2010, and Estonia. And the people and the culture hasn't changed much. It's just the population has grown 300,000 since I was here last. So when I first came, they weren't on the American Euro, and it was just been really neat to see how this country's grown. And it's still, like Jackson says, it's one of my favorite countries. Yeah, maybe they don't have the Mona Lisa, and maybe they don't have the Roman Colosseum, but it's like the people and the history and part of that family and the heritage. I just love Estonian people. And like I said the story before, it's like when I first was here in 2010 and I ran into two Estonians at the Harley-Davidson Museum. I was so excited because I knew it was like finding a needle in a haystack because there's only 1 million Estonian people, so it was really neat. But yeah, if there's questions or comments after the conference, I'm here to answer anything. Annika's here to answer anything. I think the food and everything here was amazing. It was just a great show. And I'd say let's give it a hand of applause for these ladies. It's a lot of hard work to do this. And then tomorrow we'll have the log builders competition, and we have our famous log builder from the Harkins that's gonna steal the show, Jackson.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.